Welcome to Corwin's Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast with host Peter DeWitt. This podcast is from education leaders for education leaders. Every week, Peter and our guests get together to share ideas, put research into practice, and ensure every student is learning, not by chance, but by design.
Hey, Ariel.
Hi, Peter. Another Monday. I love it.
Another Monday and another episode of, this season on surviving to thriving. Sorry. I think is just this one was really important to be able to talk to Debbie Silver because I believe she's very engaging just in general. She's also very funny, but I'm glad we got the opportunity to talk about the depth that goes along with the funny, because sometimes, and she said this, sometimes when you're funny, the depth part gets lost in the translation. So it was a really good discussion to be able to talk about that and sort of the human factor of schools.
Yeah, I know. I think listeners are going to love hearing about the authenticity, and that's what I'm sensing is such a key part to thriving, to moving from surviving to thriving, is kind of embracing your authenticity as a leader and teacher. So I'm excited for people to hear that message. But for those of you who don't know Debbie Silver, she is one of the nation's most popular keynote speakers and PD presenters. She's a former Louisiana State Teacher of the Year, and she's given presentations all over the world, helping audiences to interact with students on a more meaningful level. Her trademark humor and delightful insights leave audiences describing her presentations as where learning collides with laughter. And I love that. I think that's so true. I hope that everyone listening enjoys this interview with the delightful Debbie Silver.
Debbie Silver, welcome to the Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast. I got to tell you, I just love talking to you. You just make me smile just when I see your name. So thank you for being a part of the Leaders Coaching Leaders podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. This is great. And I love this series. This is so helpful. So to be a part of it, amazing.
Well, I'm so honored that you're here. So let's get into it. The book is Fall Down 7 Times, Get Up 8, and it's actually the second edition. What made you want to write the second edition?
Well, actually, our mutual editor, Ariel Curry, and I were talking about it, and it's my favorite of all the books I've ever written. And because of the pandemic, it was really time, because the whole book was talking about creating self-motivated learners. And I think, man, during the pandemic, we saw that gap, where kids pulled out of a highly structured setting just kind of floundered, and a few teachers kind of floundered. So I thought we really need to revisit this self-efficacy and really talk about self-reliance, self-sufficiency. Also, it was time to bring in the digital world. So there's a chapter in there on finding balance in the digital world for kids and for adults. It's for families, it's for teachers, it's for everybody. And then we also added a chapter on growth mindset, along with gifted kids, because that came up a lot in my presenting. Does growth mindset, is that important for gifted kids? And I would say yes, even probably more so. It's for struggling learners, it's for high flyers, it's for everybody. So with that in mind, and then we also put QR codes in there. So you're reading along, and I mentioned the video, you just take your iPhone and pull up the video, and they're all very short. So you don't have to stop. You just keep right on going. So we're excited about that.
The book has as much energy as you do, but I want to get back to one thing that you said right off the bat. You said it is the favorite book that you've written. I didn't realize authors had favorite books, because that's a question we get asked all the time.
Yeah.
A favorite, and it's like, oh, that would be like saying we have favorite children. You clearly have a favorite book.
I do. This is my favorite. It's all about motivation, internal motivation, self-motivation. It's written for parents, because I have 5 sons, and I've been a struggling parent, I've been a struggling teacher. And so I was just able to put that into words, but more what I've learned. So it's really not coming from, Mount Sinai, I'm a professor, so you should listen to all my research. It's more like, here's the research. Now, let me show you what that looks like to me. And I think that's one of my strengths, is being able to digest the research and say, okay, but what does that mean at school? You know, for leaders, for classroom teachers, exactly, you know, what is that telling us? What parameters do we get from reading this? So it is my favorite book. I just have to say that.
It's good to know. It's good to know. It's fair. I just, that really stood out to me. One of the things that you just mentioned is that, you know, taking your research and putting it into practice, which we know is definitely a strength of yours. It's something leaders and teachers need to hear from as well, because, you know, research can be kind of dry, and you make it practical and you make it fun. But that to me is also a clear sign of self-motivation. And one of the things that you had just said earlier, and it's definitely, we noticed it, is that when students were in the sort of the asynchronous learning at home on their own, they struggled to know what to do when they didn't know what to do, right? And
Right.
So it was self-motivation that they needed. But what you also pointed out that I think is interesting is that sometimes we are so, within a classroom, it's so focused and so directed by a teacher that kids don't always get the opportunity, students don't always get the opportunity to be self-motivated. Why do you think we as adults do that? Are we control freaks? Is it because we want is it because we want people to need us? Like, why, if we know that because you often hear that people say, like, I want students to be self-motivated, and yet our actions work against that.
I think
Why do we do that?
Look at the posters in the classroom. People say, we have a growth mindset. You know, you will line up in order, you know, you do the perp march. I'm going, okay, that's not it. And it's the same thing with, I want my students to be self-motivated, but as long as you follow all the directions when I say, the way I say to do it. And I think a lot of it is that we that are drawn into helping professions, it's because we are nurturers, we're caretakers, and most of us have done it so long, we're going, you know what, I can save you the trouble. Let's just cut through all the stuff, because I really can show you the best answer. So just listen to me and I'll show you. But that is not as valuable as discovering that themselves. And it's really hard, like for somebody like me, to shut up. And the book is a lot about that. When do you just hold your tongue? You know, be still and let this happen. And I think we do have a tendency to do that. I think a lot of it is, I think, coming from people who are creating curriculum, people who are far removed from the classroom, are making these major decisions about what goes on in the classroom. So they hit us with the pacing guides, they hit us with the curriculum guides, they hit us with, you know, we're so directed that in turn, we feel like we have to impose that on kids. It's like, well, I'd love to have more freedom, but we only have this limited amount of time. And you know what? My supervisor is coming, and they're going to expect me to be on page 48, or we should have checked off this skill set, you know, off the master plan. And I think it's just coming from the top down. So if leaders really want teachers to give kids more autonomy, they're going to have to give their teachers more autonomy. And I think that's the mark of a great leader. And I know y'all have talked about this on other podcasts, but a really remarkable leader is able to say, you know, these are our goals, these are our values, but please use your individual strength areas to make this happen. And then step back and give them a chance to do that.
I sometimes wonder, when you mention autonomy, I sometimes wonder if we want autonomy for ourselves, but we don't always want to give it to others.
Yeah, you're right.
You know what I mean? Like, I feel like we want autonomy, but
right.
you need to go and do this. Do you
like the way I said it?
Yeah. Is that, so in the book, when you're talking about autonomy, how do you foster that kind of autonomy? Because you're also right. One of the things you just mentioned, which is huge, is that we know the stress and anxiety of teachers and principals has increased dramatically over the past 15 years. That's what research, NASSP, NAESP, you know, all of them have said that. And that was prior to COVID, you know, before COVID entered into our lives. So you've got all this stress, and then you've got this whole idea of like, how do we slow down and sort of foster this idea of autonomy in order to be able to move forward? Because I'm really, honestly, very worried about people in general, especially in the United States. You know, you and I travel internationally, and we know that not every country does it in the way the United States does. But I'm seriously concerned about the mental health of educators and students.
Right.
So in the book, how do we foster that sense of autonomy and also that growth mindset piece that we all need to have?
I think part of it is that we, like you said, we need to slow down and take the time to enjoy our kids. You know, if you're looking at Finland, if you're looking at Sweden, and they really do take time to say, let kids be kids. And we're not so much doing that anymore. We let big business come in and give us a model. And I guess, I don't know why we said, okay, well, you guys must be right. Just because it works in a business sense does not mean it works in education. And so what we need to do with autonomy is we give, and you and I both know, it doesn't mean democracy, because that's not going to work at school, but that hearing a voice. So before you begin a unit, you know, and we kind of approach it if we do the KWL charts and some of the things that teachers do for pre-assessment, but that means just slowing down and saying, you know, what are you guys interested in? And what are the things you think we need to know? But some of them are just classroom practices. Like instead of saying, all right, we're going to the auditorium for the first time and here are the rules. How about saying, okay, guys, we're going to go to the auditorium and we want to be respectful of others. So what are some things we should think about? And then let the kids tell you, just think it through, you know, well, we don't want to make a lot of noise and we don't want to, you know, break line, but just walk them through it and get them before they get into a position where they're put in a place where they're going to make it, you know, just immediate stimulus and they immediately respond and it may not be the correct response. Let's do some if-thens with kids, which is a wonderful way to build growth mindset, autonomy. You know, we empower them and we say, I know this is hard. And so what are you going to do? You know, if you hit this roadblock, if somebody tries to tempt you, if this happens, what would you do? And we just think through things with them ahead of time, but always letting them know, wow, those are great ideas. Guys, thank you. That's more than I would have thought of. But that gives them the idea that I got this. We can do this. But they need to be taught and they need to get the opportunity. And then we're there to guide, because there may be some things they forgot that are really important, like don't pull the fire extinguisher button. But we're there to just to let it happen rather than always, you will do this, 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 and this. Why? Because I said so, or because it's on the test. Because my idea is if you can't give them a valid reason for why you want them to do something, I don't think you can ask them to do it. So when they're going, this is boring, you know, this is so hard, I think we need to be honest and say, oh, I know. Let me just tell you, this is the not fun part. But nobody ever got where we're trying to get without doing this part. And here's why you do it. And to the best of our ability, we explain. These are the fundamentals that you do so that later on, it goes into your automaticity. You don't have to rethink it. It just comes to you. So you get to move further and faster. And that's why we do the drills, or that's why we repeat this, or that's why we do deliberate practice. There's a reason that we're doing it.
It sounds like when you're talking too about, first of all, you're talking about authentic engagement versus compliant engagement. Mm-hmm. But there's an intersection where you're speaking to intersection between success criteria. How are we going to know when we're successful when we go to the cafeteria where other people are? But what you then brought it into, which was interesting for me, was the idea that you went from the intersection of, you know, the authentic engagement and the success criteria to actually bringing it into a place also of conceptual understanding. If we allowed the engagement, the conversation here for something as simple as going to the cafeteria, how can we take that same sort of understanding and dialogue to bring it over here to something academic, to something here behavioral? Mm-hmm. And you sort of went, you know, you went to a few different places, and what it means is stepping back to be able to like engage in dialogue through it, which I think is really important.
Right.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you, because I remember, and I don't know if you remember this, but I remember there was a Corwin retreat, and it was about 7 years ago, and you were one of the speakers, and it was the first time I had ever seen you speak. And I felt like I was laughing. I was completely engaged because you just had so many deep things that you were talking about it's talking about as well. It's not just the humor, it's the level of depth that you're talking about. How does that play out in the book? How does that play out? Because I know how it plays out when you're running a workshop,
Right.
but I also think it plays out in how you write. So how does that happen within this book, using that humor that we all know you have? And for those people who don't know Debbie Silver, you need to know. How does that play out in the book?
One of the things is I don't want to disengage like my concrete sequential learners by having them say, oh, she's just being silly. And a lot of times, and I like it that you brought that up, because I have to be very careful with that. If it's too much, people easily dismiss you. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important to say, this is something really heavy to think about. But also, guys, we're all struggling with this. We're not all in the same boat, but we're all in the same storm. So as adults, can we just agree that this is a bone of contention, or this is a challenge that we have? And then, to tell stories that are so universal. That's why people like my humor, because it's very universal. Every story I tell, whether it's about my own biological sons or, my real kids, my students, people are going, oh yeah, I knew somebody like that, or I've had that happen. And it just brings it all down to reality. It's not that panacea, pie in the sky, theory-based, this is 1, 2, 3 and it'll work, because we know that's not true about anything. There are no silver bullets. And so what we have to do is say, let me give you some ideas you may not have thought of, or more importantly, with veteran teachers, let me remind you of some things that you may used to have done, but for some reason you got away from it. And you might want to reactivate those strategies, those activities that you did. And I get that a lot, from administrators, from teachers. They'll say, you just reminded me, I used to do this thing, and I don't know why I stopped. But I'm going to do it again. I'll tell you why you stopped. Because it got written out by some curriculum writer or by some pacing guide person, and you let go of those things that make you who you are. And when teachers come to me and say, I really want to teach a unit on, whatever, but, they tell us we have to follow the pacing guide, the curriculum guide, and I always go, okay, you tell me what you want to teach, I will find it in your curriculum guide. I guarantee you we can make it happen. But I think teachers, leaders, we do have strength areas. We do have things that set us apart. So we don't ever want to let that go, because I think that's when we lose our joy. And that's when we lose our momentum. Because think about you, Peter. You've been a principal. And think about the days you were going to get to do that thing that you do the best. And you knew this was going to work. And you're just so excited on that day. But on the days where you're having to follow the district policies, and this is what we do, and I've got to talk to these parents in this certain way, not so much. So it is important that we laugh. And in writing, people tell me I write like I talk. I'm like, I'm so sorry, but that's how I do it. But I do want people to smile, or just crack a grin, or just understand I get it, they get it, we all get it. Let's work on this together.
I think I'm glad we're talking about this, because one of the things that I think is so important about your approach is that what we know is the past year and a half has been really, really difficult. And, I've been writing the Finding Common Ground blog for a decade, and I was hired to write about social emotional learning, and then it moved into leadership and everything else. Before COVID, whenever I wrote about social emotional learning, that's where I got the most pushback. People actually said, teachers and leaders said, we don't have time. These aren't people outside of school. These are people in school saying, we don't have time. We have to focus on academics. And then, of course, COVID hit. And it's about, we need Maslow and Bloom and all this. What I think is important about your approach is that you're really talking about being human.
Yeah.
And knowing that, like, let's not just look at this as a challenge, because quite frankly, life is always going to throw us challenges. We don't get through here unscathed. And what I really enjoy about your approach, and I honestly mean this, is that I can laugh, but I can be engaged. And you're really talking about being human, and there's no downside to that. Right?
Yeah.
That's how I feel. And one of the things that you wrote about in the book is the growth mindset. And you just had said that that's the growth mindset working with gifted kids was new. What I remember John Hattie's research years ago showed that the growth mindset had a low effect size. I wrote a blog called Why the Growth Mindset Won't Work. And I actually interviewed Carol Dweck last year on A Seat at the Table, which is a web show.
I love that. I love that interview.
Yeah, that I do with Ed Week. But the thing is that growth mindset, we're always looking at it like it's about the kids, and it should be. The problem is it's the adults that need the growth mindset. And one of the things that worries me a little bit is that we've been talking a lot about COVID learning loss. And it's not that it's not real, right? It's not that it's not real, but I feel like it sets up a generation of victims.
Right.
And it kind of gives us a reason to say, well, you don't know this because of COVID learning loss. So when you talk about growth mindset and working with kids, where's the intersection there between growth mindset and what we've experienced because of the pandemic, and what we really have to think about too in the fall? Is there like an intersection there?
I think there definitely is. And man, you just hit on something so close to my heart, because I just don't let people say learning loss, because I'm saying, all right, what are you comparing that to? Because we were all, doing the same thing, switching to virtual. Every country, we were pushed against the wall.
Yeah.
So we did what we could. And learning loss, that only means if you're looking at a specific timetable, and who said what year you had to learn what. So I would question that. I would say we're not where we usually are at this point. I would take that. But let's be more like, there's another Corwin book called Teaching Kids to Thrive, The Other Essential Skills, which is an SEL book that I co-wrote with Deidre Stafford. And in it, I was talking about the movie The Blind Side. And Miss Tui just keeps getting blindsided by all these problems that she's trying to help with her foster son. And her reaction every time somebody goes, well, that's not going to work because so-and-so. And she'll just look at him and go, well, okay then. And then she switches gears. And that's what I think kids have to do. This is your stumbling block. We need to teach kids to say, well, okay then. What's another way we can do it? Because just like you said, if we start hammering on, well, bless your heart, you're not a virtual learner. Well, bless your heart, you had a low bandwidth, or you had to share, then they learn to be helpless. And we know that's cyclical. I didn't get to do it, so I can't, so I won't, so I can't, so I won't, so I can't. And Seligman talks about that. What he says is you have all these uncontrollable events, so you perceive that you don't have control, and then you start extrapolating that to your world now. And that's very dangerous. And we see teachers that do it. I will coach teachers. And I'll say, well, have you thought about this? No, that wouldn't work. I tried that in 1980. It didn't work then. It's not going to work now. I'm going, all right, Eeyore, have you tried this? No, that wouldn't work either. Okay, well, here's something you might think about. No, I can't do that. And I'm like, well, just die. Okay, you're a total waste of clothes. No, I'm kidding. But it is so frustrating because they get caught in this negativity. And another Corwin book that we wrote is called Deliberate Optimism, because I think optimism is a choice. And I think we have to model that for kids. And I've learned from Brene Brown to quit saying, well, at least, because I used to do that. And people are like, shut up. People really want to be heard. And I think we should hear what they're telling us and say, that had to be hard. That had to be challenging. I'm so glad you told me that. Since we can't control any of that, let's focus on what we can control. And maybe that means on one-on-one with a teacher, with a student, just breaking it down and saying, all right, here's what we need to do. We need to separate what you feel is your roadblock. Let's separate what you have control over and things that you'll never have control over. And those things, let's just let those go. Well, okay then. And how can we minimize that? But when we give kids things that you can control, and then we keep moving that bar, and this means with our support. So, people say, Alfie Kohn criticizes growth mindset because he says you're just telling kids to work harder and you're just tossing them, free. And I said, that's not what it is. And Dweck explained that in your interview. People have misinterpreted it. But what we're saying is that we focus them on what can you do. We also weave that with, I believe you can do this. We also make sure that we're paying attention with our total undivided focused attention to this learner and say, I'm interested in you. And then when they go to the next step, we recognize that, but we don't give stickers, stars, confetti, trophies. We just say, wow, how does that feel? Because you didn't even think you could do it. How do you feel now? But let's turn it back. I think we've gotten too extrinsic in what we reward and not intrinsic enough in showing kids that joy of hard-earned success.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we have to be clear on is we know during COVID, access was definitely an issue. I mean, we work with lots of schools that are high poverty. I think what's important with what you're saying is that you can't compound the access issue, because we need to work through the access issue for sure, but you can't compound it by having a deficit mindset towards students.
Exactly.
Because sometimes kids can't recover from that. If we always look at students with a deficit mindset, then we're not helping them achieve what they could achieve. And one of the things that, the sort of the last question for the podcast. One of the interesting things about what you were saying with growth mindset is that you mentioned a lot about grit and resilience, and you've talked about this in books before. But what about those people that say you really don't understand what it means for marginalized students? If you're going to use grit and resilience, isn't that just another way to blame marginalized students?
And just small correction, I never use the term grit.
Oh, okay.
Angela Duckworth, when she first brought out her research, she said this is something that we can track, but we can't teach. Mm-hmm. And my thought was, well, then what good are you? Mm-hmm. And so I have really stayed away from that. And I see what people are going. Her research was with the cadets. It was a very highly motivated group already. Mm-hmm. And the same argument. What about marginalized kids? Right. That was my introduction to teaching. My kids didn't even have running water in their homes. I mean, those were the kids I knew. And when I first got there, because I had the benefit of a really good education, I had existential guilt. And I was like, let me go in and save them. Let me go in. How can I make this up to them? So my response was very empathetic. But I think what they heard was, oh, you poor little thing. There's no, I understand why you can't. And Brene Brown has taught me very clearly, and the kids taught me, before I had the words to express it, that what they need is empathy and not sympathy. Mm-hmm. So that I hear them and go, that has got to be hard. Man, I am so glad you shared that with me. Okay, so let's you and I think together about what can you do to make this better. And maybe you could tell me some things I could do to make this better, but I want to support you and give you the power to do that. So we can say that to any child. And you always hear me say, every child deserves a reasonable chance at success. Mm-hmm. And I said it then, I'm going to say it now, and I know that we have a lot of pushback on that. People are saying you're looking at meritocracy. But that's really not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is what you mentioned earlier. In the background, we all still need to be fighting for more seats at the table for all kids, for more opportunities for all kids. I'm going to continue to fight that fight. But in the classroom, what I'm going to say to every learner, no matter where they are, I'm going to figure out where they are, not where they're supposed to be, not where they'd be in a perfect world, not even where the teacher last year said they are. I'm going to figure out where they are. And I'm going to say, all right, you got this. Now let's go one step further. Show me what you got. And I think that that is reasonable for every kind of child. And I hear what people are saying, that we've used well, you're just not working hard enough. You don't have enough grit. You weren't born with it. To beat kids over the head again. I'm like, no, that's not it. It is, all of this is meant to support kids and not in any way to label them, to rationalize, excuse what they're doing. It is a support mechanism. And our feedback has to be on things that help them get better.
Debbie Silver, it is always an honor to talk to you. Thank you for being a part of the season, because we're talking about surviving to thriving here, and you definitely focused on that. And fall down 7 times, get up 8. Such a pleasure to have you on the Coaching Leaders podcast. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Peter. Bye, guys.
So Ariel, I have to admit, one of the things that I thought it was important for us to talk about is the idea of grit and resilience. And I wanted to be able to clarify in the conversation with Debbie, when we're talking about access is an issue. Access has been an issue long before COVID. It has been an issue during COVID. But one of the things that's also an issue that I think she is focusing on in the book is not that access isn't an issue, but it's also a deficit mindset is an issue. And we have control over both. We have control over providing access in as many different ways as possible, but we also, every single day, have control over having a deficit mindset depending on where students are coming from. And I love that she shared her journey of when she was first teaching and, where the kids were coming from and how she sympathized and then moved to empathy with them. And I thought that was an important part of the discussion. What about you?
I totally agree. I loved that emphasis on high expectations teaching and how important that is. I mean, we know that from the research that that's critical to all student success. And then I also loved her messages for leaders too, that, a remarkable leader recognizes the genius of their teachers and gives them autonomy. That's an important part to helping your teachers not just survive, but thrive. So I love that, Debbie is able to speak at such a range from leaders all the way to students themselves.
Yeah. And the book, second edition, I thought it was important for her to talk about where the second edition came from. And I thought it was worthwhile to make sure there was a second edition. I will say she is the first author I've ever heard actually say they have a favorite book. So
yeah,
that was pretty risque to talk about, but she certainly did. So
that says a lot.
Yeah. Every time I get to talk to Debbie, I think is just a really valuable conversation. So that was good.
I agree. All right. Well, we will be back next week with our next episode.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Talk to you later.